What if I told you that a single sunny week of high summer temperatures could quietly take more lives in a developed, wealthy nation than a massive earthquake or a Category 5 hurricane? I know, it sounds totally unbelievable. For most of us, hearing a heat wave is on the forecast just sounds like a fantastic excuse to pack up and head to the beach. But as a public health official, I need to be incredibly clear with you. That framing is dangerously wrong. What we're actually looking at is a quiet, highly lethal medical threat that turns a minor sunny inconvenience into an absolute biological nightmare. The reality of what is unfolding right now globally is going to completely shift your perspective on what summer weather actually means to the human body. Just recently, France officially reported over 1,000 excess deaths in just 3 short days. I really want to let that number sink in for a second. Over 1,000 lives lost. And we're not talking about over a grueling months-long season. We're talking about a mere 72 hours during a record-smashing heat wave. This staggering statistic completely cements the gravity of what is happening. This isn't just a warm spell, folks. It's a full-blown climate and medical emergency that is literally turning the European continent into a furnace. So, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're breaking down a staggering and deeply sobering piece of global weather and health news. Public Health France has just released an emergency preliminary report revealing the horrific human cost of this historic heat wave sweeping across Europe. We're going to dive deep into the structural and public health meltdown happening right before our eyes. We'll look at exactly why European infrastructure is failing so drastically, how extreme heat triggers severe physiological failure in the human body, and what this shifting global weather means for the future of our cities, our economies, and our healthcare systems. Okay, let's set the stage and look at the unprecedented context of this crisis. To really understand the stakes, you have to look at the staggering continent-wide scope of this emergency. We're talking about Germany completely shattering all-time records, with temperatures soaring past 41 degrees Celsius. It's gotten so hot that major steel train tracks are literally buckling and warping under the sun. We're seeing massive forest fires breaking out across multiple borders. And the World Health Organization has issued a stark, terrifying warning, confirming that Europe is now officially the fastest warming continent on Earth. Headlines about hot summers might sound completely normal to a lot of people, but the data is proving this is a massive structural crisis. Now, you're going to see a very specific term plastered across every major news outlet this week, and it's absolutely crucial we understand it: excess deaths. What does that public health jargon actually mean? Well, you see, scientists and doctors don't just sit around waiting for a medical examiner to write heat stroke on a death certificate. Extreme heat is a silent killer. It kills quietly by aggravating existing medical conditions like cardiovascular disease, respiratory failure, or severe asthma. So to track the true, real-world impact, public health researchers calculate what we call the mathematical fingerprint of a hidden disaster. They measure the sudden surge in mortality above what we would consider a perfectly normal baseline during a non-crisis period. Let me explain exactly how that calculation works in the real world. During a calm, comfortable month like April or May, France normally sees roughly 900 to 1,000 people pass away per day. That's the normal baseline. But look at what happens during the intense Wednesday to Friday stretch of this heat wave. The daily toll suddenly surges to over 1,200 on Wednesday and then jumps to more than 1,400 on Thursday and Friday. That massive, sudden spike above the normal baseline, that is the excess death count. It completely reveals the invisible biological lethality of the heat that often goes totally unrecorded on standard death certificates. To really grasp why this is happening so intensely in Europe, I want to share a really powerful analogy. Imagine you have a high-end, classic European car. It was custom designed decades and decades ago to drive beautifully through cool, misty, alpine roads. It has a gorgeous interior, a highly refined engine, but it does not have a heavy-duty radiator, and it certainly doesn't have a powerful air conditioning unit because, historically, it literally never needed one. Now, if you suddenly take that classic car and try to drive it through a scorching desert in the middle of June, the engine is going to quickly overheat, the fluids will boil, and the entire system will suffer a catastrophic breakdown. European infrastructure is exactly like that classic car. For centuries, countries built their homes and their hospitals out of heavy brick and dense concrete. This architectural design was incredibly intentional. It was meant to trap heat inside during freezing, brutal winters. They just do not have massive central cooling systems built into the walls. So when global warming flips the script, these buildings turn into literal stone ovens, aggressively trapping hot air inside. As public health officials, we are desperately urging citizens to make simple modifications to these historical homes right now. Things like applying heat-reflective window films, putting up heavy blackout curtains during peak sun hours, and setting up cross-ventilation at night just to survive the indoor temperatures. This architectural mismatch leads to a deeply, deeply tragic reality. When the severe weather warnings hit France, the surge in fatalities was incredibly sudden. A staggering 85% of those excess deaths were senior citizens aged 65 and above. Emergency services in Paris were completely overwhelmed with calls coming directly from private households. You had elderly residents trapped, suffering from severe heat stress, inside their own non-air-conditioned apartments. This is exactly why cities must rapidly, and I mean rapidly, deploy public cooling centers. We desperately need safe, air-conditioned public buildings where vulnerable elderly populations can find refuge when their own homes become a literal danger to their lives. And this climate crucible extended way beyond France. The extreme heat dome pushed deeply into Central and Eastern Europe. Germany recorded an all-time daytime high of 41.5 degrees Celsius. But medically speaking, the most terrifying data point here is actually the night temperature. Eastern Saxony experienced suffocating tropical nights where temperatures refused to drop below 29 degrees. When night temperatures stay this high, chronic health conditions worsen drastically. Your body literally never gets a chance to recover from the daytime thermal strain. It leads to compounding, overwhelming cardiovascular stress day after day. Under this intense thermal expansion, the actual physical infrastructure of the continent began to fall apart like dominoes. On day one, massive concrete autobahn highways literally cracked and buckled upward, forcing huge emergency shutdowns. By day two, national rail operators were begging citizens to cancel their travel because overhead power lines were collapsing, trapping hundreds of people in sweltering, powerless trains. And beyond the transport grid, the economy took a massive, multi-million-dollar hit due to the complete halt of outdoor labor. Construction workers, agricultural staff, delivery drivers, they simply could not work safely in this environment, causing huge cascading supply chain delays. And incredibly, by day three, the intense heat triggered forest fires that caused buried, unexploded World War II ammunition to spontaneously detonate. It's almost hard to believe. Speaking frankly from a clinical perspective for a moment, we really need to understand the exact biological mechanism of this crisis. First, those heavy stone buildings trap the daytime heat, radiating it back into the rooms overnight. Denied that crucial nighttime rest, the human body's core temperature starts to steadily rise. As early warning signs, medical staff are trained to look for severe confusion, a total cessation of sweating, and a rapid, weak pulse. If the body isn't aggressively cooled down, the cardiovascular system goes into absolute overdrive, pumping massive amounts of blood to the skin to try and cool off. But this diverts crucial, life-saving blood flow away from internal organs. Eventually, this severe lack of oxygenated blood causes the kidneys, the liver, and the intestines to suffer ischemic damage, and that leads directly to fatal multi-organ failure. So the absolutely crucial point in public health is understanding context. A temperature of 41 degrees Celsius in India? That sounds like a completely standard average summer day. In northern and western India, temperatures routinely cross 45 degrees without society collapsing. This sharp contrast forces us to ask a really important question. Why does 41 degrees cause mass casualties in Paris, while Indian cities just continue to function normally? Well, it all comes down to the fact that Europe currently offers nearly zero structural protection against extreme heat, while India is fundamentally built for it from the ground up. Let's look at the really specific adaptations that allow populations in India to manage these wild extremes. Biologically, over generations, populations in hot climates do develop a higher physiological tolerance. But the infrastructure is the real hero here. Homes utilize brilliant passive cooling techniques. They're built with really high ceilings, excellent cross-ventilation, and shaded verandas that prevent direct heat absorption. You'll constantly find marble or tiled floors that stay naturally cool to the touch. And culturally, society just adapts its rhythm. School timings are shifted to the early morning, markets routinely close during the blistering afternoon hours, and citizens stay consistently hydrated with traditional coolers like Nimbu Pani. They are structurally and socially totally prepared. When you realize that surviving this danger is entirely about how prepared a society is, the massive economic toll of our future becomes crystal clear. European countries are going to be forced to spend literally trillions retrofitting their historic infrastructure. We are talking about fundamentally altering city building codes to mandate passive cooling, like green roofs covered in vegetation, and using heat-reflective building materials that mitigate solar absorption in dense urban environments. Furthermore, as millions of new heavy-duty air conditioning units are suddenly bought and plugged in simultaneously, it is going to severely strain vulnerable national energy grids, massively increasing the risk of deadly, widespread blackouts during peak heat hours. And we know for a fact this isn't just some freak occurrence. The World's Weather Attribution Group recently found that human-caused climate change made this extreme thermal event over 200 times more likely today than just a few decades ago. 200 times. This extreme heat is the definitive, undeniable result of our changing atmosphere. Because of this, we are looking at absolutely skyrocketing national health insurance costs to treat a wave of chronic heat-related illnesses. We're also looking at permanent structural declines in global workforce productivity as outdoor labor becomes increasingly impossible during summer months. That translates directly to massive, unrecoverable economic costs for businesses across the globe. Which brings us to a really chilling conclusion from the World Health Organization. They issued a blunt wake-up call to the planet, stating that the phrase once-in-a-generation heat wave is officially dead. The tragic loss of life we are seeing proves this is now a dangerous annual reality. To survive this, we urgently need true international cooperation. Developed nations must start actively sharing heat adaptation strategies, advanced medical protocols, and urban planning models across borders, because the historical infrastructure of the global north is now completely out of sync with our changing planet. Nature always holds the ultimate power, and it's forcing us to make some incredibly difficult decisions right now. Now that extreme heat is regularly breaking records, we're left with a trillion-dollar debate. Should developed nations focus their resources entirely on reducing carbon emissions to try and stop the warming at its source? Or should we accept this terrifying new reality and prioritize spending trillions right now to adapt our cities, our hospitals, and our lifestyles to simply survive the heat that's already here? It is arguably the most vital question that will dictate our global climate policy for decades to come. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next one.